You thought you knew your life, but the truth is about to change everything. The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of Lucas Hayes' life. The millionaire CEO had finally found love again after years of heartbreak and failed relationships. His fiancée, Laura, stood by his side, their wedding ceremony almost complete. The guests were all waiting for the grand reveal, the moment when Lucas would finally marry the woman he loved. But Lucas' smile faded as he saw a familiar face in the crowd. His ex-wife, Jessica, stepped into the room. Lucas froze. There was no way she was here, not after everything that had happened. His mother had sent the invitation, knowing full well the tension that still existed between Lucas and Jessica. But the real shock came as Jessica walked down the aisle, hand in hand with two children. They weren't just any children. They were twins. And when Lucas looked at them, he felt his heart stop. They looked exactly like him. His mind raced. The twins were his. "I didn't expect you to bring them today," Lucas said, his voice thick with disbelief. Jessica looked at him, her face calm but guarded. "You never gave me the chance to tell you," she said quietly. "They're your children, Lucas. And it's time you knew the truth." His world spun around him as the room grew silent. Laura, his fiancée, was standing there, stunned by the revelation. The wedding, the day that was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter in his life, was now shattered. His past had returned with a vengeance, and there was no going back. Lucas' heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process the reality of the situation. His ex-wife, whom he had left years ago, had kept a secret that had now surfaced in the worst possible way. The twins, his children, had been kept from him all this time. The shock was overwhelming, the hurt undeniable. His mother, Patricia, watched from the side, a subtle smile on her face. It was clear that she knew about the twins all along. She had orchestrated this moment, inviting Jessica to the wedding, knowing it would destroy Lucas' happiness. She had played her part in the drama, ensuring that her son would never fully escape his past. Lucas' mind was in turmoil. How could he have not known? How could Jessica have kept such a massive secret from him? The twins were his flesh and blood, and yet, for years, they had lived without him, without even knowing who their father was. Jessica didn't say another word. She simply looked at him with a mix of sadness and resignation. "I didn't want to hurt you, Lucas," she said quietly, "but I couldn't keep them away from you any longer." Lucas couldn't speak. His throat was tight with emotion. He had built a life with Laura, and now everything was in jeopardy. The secret he never knew existed had just been laid bare, and the truth was more painful than anything he could have imagined. His gaze turned to Laura, who was standing a few feet away, still processing the shock of it all. The look on her face was one of confusion and hurt. "Laura," Lucas began, his voice cracking, but he didn't know what to say. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "Your ex-wife shows up with your children at your wedding?" Lucas couldn't answer. His world had just imploded. He wasn't the man he thought he was. He wasn't just a millionaire CEO with a perfect life. He was a father who had been absent for years. His family, his real family, had been kept from him, and the damage was done. The wedding, the future he had planned with Laura, felt like a distant dream now. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension, as Lucas tried to make sense of everything. Would this new revelation shatter his chance at happiness? Could he ever be the father he was supposed to be? The next steps seemed impossible, but Lucas knew one thing. His life had just changed forever. Lucas stood motionless, still processing the whirlwind of emotions that had just exploded in his life. His wedding, the event he had planned meticulously for, now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the revelation of the twins. The room around him buzzed with whispers, but all he could focus on was Jessica standing before him with their children. He felt a sickening wave of guilt wash over him as he realized how much time he had lost. He had spent so many years building his empire, but he had abandoned his family in the process. He glanced at his mother, Patricia, whose smile was barely concealed behind her cool, controlled demeanor. She had orchestrated this moment. She had known about the twins, and perhaps, deep down, she had known this was the only way to force Lucas to face his past. She had invited Jessica to his wedding, fully aware of the storm it would cause. Lucas turned to Laura, his fiancée, who was now standing by the side, her face pale with shock. The pain in her eyes was evident, but there was also something else, betrayal. He had promised her a future, one where they could build their lives together, and now, with one revelation, everything was crumbling. Laura stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Lucas, how could you keep this from me? How could you not tell me about them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas didn't have an answer. The words were stuck in his throat. "I didn't know," he finally managed to say. "I didn't know they existed, Laura." His words hung in the air, but they felt empty. The damage had already been done. He had always prided himself on his success, on the life he had created, but now he realized that none of it mattered if he couldn't even be there for his own children. The silence between them was deafening. Jessica, her face calm but heavy with the weight of the years of secrets, spoke next. "I didn't want to hurt you, Lucas," she said quietly, "but I couldn't keep them away from you anymore. They deserve to know their father." Lucas looked at the twins, who were standing silently beside Jessica. The boy and the girl had eyes that looked just like his, bright, searching, full of innocence. They were his, there was no doubt about it. But the realization came with a rush of pain. He had missed their childhoods. He had missed everything. He had been a father in name only, and now the consequences were laid bare. "You could have told me," Lucas muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "You could have given me a chance to be there for them." Jessica's face softened, but there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I tried, Lucas," she replied. "But you were too focused on your career, on everything else. You didn't want to be a part of their lives. And now here we are." The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She was right. He had chosen his career over his family, and now it was too late. Lucas turned to his mother, searching for some kind of comfort, but all he received was a knowing look. Patricia didn't speak, but her expression said it all. She had manipulated the situation for years, keeping him from the truth. She had believed that this day would come, the day when Lucas would finally be forced to face the consequences of his choices. "You planned this," Lucas said to his mother, his voice trembling with anger. "You knew about them, didn't you?" Patricia didn't flinch. "I did what I thought was best," she replied coolly. "You needed to face reality, Lucas. You needed to see that there's more to life than your business." Her words stung, but they were true. Lucas had been living in a bubble, focused only on his success, and now, that bubble had burst. Laura's voice cut through the tension. "I can't do this, Lucas," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't be part of a life that's built on lies. I thought I was marrying someone who was honest with me." She turned and walked away, leaving Lucas standing there, broken. The wedding, which had started as the happiest day of his life, was now a bitter reminder of everything he had lost. As Jessica gathered the twins and prepared to leave, Lucas couldn't help but feel the weight of his own failure. He had everything: wealth, success, a fiancé, and yet, it all seemed meaningless now. He looked at his children, who were still so innocent, still so unaware of the complexities of their family. They deserved better than the man he had become. And in that moment, Lucas made a decision. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. He could be there for them now. As the family left the venue, Lucas stood alone, watching them go. His life was in pieces, but for the first time, he knew that he had a chance to rebuild. It would be hard, and it would take time, but he was ready to make things right, for the twins, for Laura, and for himself. Lucas stood at the edge of the hotel's grand reception hall, his mind racing. The wedding, which was supposed to mark the start of his new life, felt like a distant memory. The shock of the twins' revelation had hit him harder than he expected. He watched as his ex-wife, Jessica, gently guided the twins through the crowd, their innocent faces so familiar, so haunting. He never knew they existed, never imagined he had two children who looked just like him. Every step he took toward them felt like stepping deeper into the unknown. His mother, Patricia, was nowhere to be seen. Lucas didn't need to find her to know she had orchestrated this. The realization hit him that his entire life, the facade he had built around himself, was a lie. His empire, his business, even his relationship with Laura, it all seemed meaningless now. What good was success if he couldn't even be there for his children? He tried to make his way toward Jessica, but the weight of the situation was overwhelming. The room buzzed with the quiet whispers of the guests, all eager to see how this family drama would unfold. His fiancée, Laura, was still processing everything, sitting in a corner with her arms crossed. Lucas couldn't blame her for being upset. After all, he had kept a secret so huge, so life-altering, that he couldn't even explain it all in a few words. As he approached Jessica, he could see the calm in her eyes, the same calm that had always been there even when their marriage was falling apart. "You're here," Lucas finally managed to say, his voice shaky. "I never thought you would show up." Jessica glanced at him, her eyes softening. "I had to, Lucas," she said quietly. "I couldn't keep them away from you anymore. They deserve to know their father." Her words stung. He had always known Jessica to be strong, but this was different. She was no longer the ex-wife who resented him. She was a mother trying to do what was best for their children. "I didn't know," Lucas whispered, the weight of the words settling like a ton of bricks on his chest. "I never knew. You never told me." Jessica nodded, her face serious. "I tried, Lucas. I really did. But every time I reached out, you were too focused on your business, on everything else. I couldn't keep waiting for you to change." Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. She was right. He had always put his work first, always assuming he could come back later, always thinking there would be time to fix things. But now it was too late. He had missed their childhood. The twins were not just his children. They were the children of a life he had abandoned, of a woman he had walked away from. They were strangers, and yet they were his family. He looked at the twins again, this time seeing them in a new light. They had his eyes, his features, his smile. He had missed all of that. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything." Jessica reached out, her hand gently resting on his. "I don't expect you to make up for all the lost years, Lucas," she said softly. "But I do want you to be there for them. They deserve a father, whether you were ready or not." Lucas looked down at the twins, who were quietly playing with a toy in the corner, unaware of the tension that had just exploded in their lives. His heart ached for them. How could he have been so blind? How could he have missed so much? He had spent so many years working, thinking success was the answer to everything, but now he realized it was nothing without his family. The room felt smaller, suffocating even. He turned toward Laura, his fiancée, who was still sitting in the corner, her face a mixture of hurt and confusion. "I never meant for this to happen," Lucas said quietly to her. She stood up, her expression unreadable. "You never meant for it, Lucas? You've spent our entire relationship keeping secrets from me. How can I trust you now?" Her words were like a slap in the face. He had betrayed her, too. The wedding was supposed to be the beginning of their life together, but now everything felt shattered. The future they had planned seemed impossible to reach. Lucas turned back to Jessica. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "But I want to try. I want to be there for them. I want to be their father." Jessica's expression softened. "I know you do," she said. "But it's not going to be easy, Lucas. You've missed a lot. The only way forward is to show them, show me that you're serious about being part of our lives." Lucas nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He couldn't undo the past, but he could start rebuilding, one step at a time. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time, Lucas was ready to face it, not as a millionaire CEO, but as a father. The camera lingered on the twins, who were still playing, completely unaware of the emotional storm swirling around them. They were innocent. They were his responsibility now. The future wasn't certain, but one thing was clear. Lucas was finally ready to take the first step toward becoming the father he had never been. Lucas felt as though the floor had been ripped out from beneath him. The revelation about the twins had left him reeling, unable to focus on anything but the truth he had just discovered. As Jessica, his ex-wife, stood there with the twins at her side, Lucas struggled to process the impact of the moment. The guests at the wedding were murmuring, gossiping, as they watched the unexpected drama unfold. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but all he could focus on were the twins. They looked so much like him. There was no denying they were his children, and he had never known. A deep sense of guilt and regret washed over him. How could he have missed their entire childhood? How could he have been so blind, so selfish? Jessica, for all the years of silence and hurt between them, had kept this secret, and now it was out in the open. She wasn't just a reminder of his past. She was now a reflection of the missed opportunities, the time he could never get back. He felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Meanwhile, his mother, Patricia, stood in the corner, her arms crossed, a knowing look on her face. She had played a role in this, he could see it now. She had orchestrated this moment. She had brought Jessica back into his life, invited her to the wedding, all with the intention of forcing him to face the consequences of his past actions. Patricia had never been one to shy away from manipulation, and Lucas now saw it for what it was. He turned to look at her, his anger flaring. "You knew about them," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "You knew about the twins, and you never told me. You planned this." Patricia's expression remained neutral. "I did what I thought was best, Lucas," she replied coolly. "You needed to face the truth. You needed to confront what you've been avoiding for years." Her words stung, but he knew she was right. Lucas had spent his life chasing success, never once stopping to consider what really mattered. Now, he was paying the price. He had abandoned his family, his children, in the pursuit of wealth and status. And now, his family was broken, and his future with Laura was hanging by a thread. Laura, who had been standing nearby, now looked at him with a mix of shock and hurt. She had witnessed everything. The sudden appearance of his ex-wife and the twins, the confusion and betrayal in Lucas' eyes. She had thought she knew him, but now she was unsure. "How could you keep this from me, Lucas?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you keep something so important, so life-changing, from me?" Lucas didn't have an answer. His throat was tight with emotion, and he could barely speak. "I didn't know," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "I didn't know they were mine." The words felt hollow, and he knew they weren't enough. He had failed her, just like he had failed his children. Laura stood there, her arms crossed, a look of disbelief on her face. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," she said quietly, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if we can move forward after this." Her words cut through him like a knife. Lucas had built a life with her, a life he had thought was full of promise, but now everything was falling apart. The woman he loved, the family he had dreamed of, was slipping away, and all because of his past mistakes. As the reality of the situation set in, Lucas turned back to Jessica. She had always been the strong one, the one who had kept it together while he had wandered through life. Now, she was the mother of his children, and he had no idea how to begin making up for the years he had missed. "I'm sorry," he said softly. I didn't know what I was missing." Jessica nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "It's too late for apologies, Lucas," she said quietly. "You can't undo the past, and you can't erase the time you've lost. But you can start being a father now. They deserve that." Lucas nodded, knowing she was right. It was too late to fix the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could build a future with his children. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't keep running from the truth any longer. He had a responsibility to them now, and he would do whatever it took to be the father they needed. The wedding had been a dream, but it was now over, shattered by the truth. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Lucas was ready to face it. He turned back to Laura, who was still standing there, waiting for him to make a decision. He didn't know if they could move forward together, but he knew he had to try. For the sake of his children, for the sake of his future, he had to take the first step toward redemption. And with that thought, he stepped forward, ready to face the consequences of his actions, ready to rebuild the life he had broken. The following days felt like a blur for Lucas. His mind kept replaying the moment when Jessica had walked into the wedding, the twins by her side. The weight of the truth sat heavy on his chest, suffocating him at times. He was no longer just a successful businessman. He was a father who had failed to be there when his children needed him most. As he sat in his office, staring at his computer screen, the constant ringing of his phone felt distant. He couldn't focus. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the twins. Their eyes were his, their smiles were his, and it hurt knowing that he had missed it all. He had always thought his success would give him everything he ever wanted, but now it seemed hollow. He had the wealth, the fame, and the admiration, but what did any of it matter without his family? He hadn't just lost years of their lives. He had lost a part of himself in the process. A knock at the door broke his train of thought. Laura entered, her face unreadable. She had been distant since the wedding. She had been patient, trying to understand, but Lucas knew she was struggling. He had failed her too. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm, but there was a firmness to it that Lucas couldn't ignore. He nodded, gesturing for her to sit. As she did, he could see the hurt in her eyes, the hurt he had caused. "I don't know where we go from here, Lucas," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to trust you again. You kept something so big from me, something that changes everything. Lucas felt his chest tighten. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't know about the twins. I didn't know they existed, Laura. I didn't know how much I was missing. Laura shook her head, her gaze fixed on him. You were always so focused on your work, Lucas. Always thinking that more success would make everything better. But it didn't, did it? You missed them. You missed us. And now, I don't know if I can forgive you. Lucas looked down, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. His obsession with building his empire had come at the expense of everything else. His family, his future, his relationships. The success he had worked so hard to achieve now felt like a chain that bound him to a past he couldn't undo. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice thick with regret. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't even expect you to stay, but I need you to know that I am going to do whatever it takes to make this right. Not just for me, but for them, for the twins. They deserve a father, and I can't keep running from that. Laura looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I don't know if I can stay, Lucas. I don't know if I can be with someone who keeps secrets like this. But I'll give you time. Time to prove that you're serious about this, about being a father, about being here for them. Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. He knew that earning her trust back would take time, but he was willing to do it. He couldn't undo the past, but he could start working toward the future. He didn't know what it would look like, but for the first time in a long time, he had a chance to rebuild his life. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But Lucas was ready. He was ready to be the father he had never been. He was ready to be the man his family deserved. And maybe, just maybe, he could win Laura back. He wouldn't stop fighting for her, for the twins, for the chance to make it all right. As Lucas sat there, contemplating everything that had happened, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't change the past, but he had the power to shape his future. And he was going to start by being there, for the people who mattered most. Days passed, and Lucas felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The guilt was relentless. His thoughts were consumed by the twins, their faces haunting him at every turn. He had never known they existed, and yet, here they were. Two innocent children who were his responsibility. Jessica had told him they deserved to know their father, and now that reality had hit him square in the face, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Every moment of his life, every business decision, every relationship had been centered on one thing, success. But now, it felt meaningless. He had spent years chasing an empire, thinking that success would make everything better, but it had cost him his family. He couldn't keep running from the truth anymore. He needed to face it, to face the life he had missed out on. It wasn't just about the twins, it was about Laura, too. His fiancée, the woman he had promised a future to, was still there, but she was distant now, and rightfully so. She had witnessed everything. The shocking arrival of Jessica, the revelation of the twins, and the trust between them had been shattered. Lucas knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild that trust, but he had to try. The first step was acknowledging that he had to change. He couldn't keep living the way he had been. As he walked through his office the next morning, he saw the piles of work that needed his attention, but none of it seemed important anymore. He knew he had to make things right, not just for himself, but for the children he had neglected for so long. That afternoon, Lucas decided to visit Jessica. He had to see the twins. He had to take responsibility for them, even if it meant facing the past he had been avoiding. He arrived at her apartment, his heart racing. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew it was time to take that first step toward becoming a father. Jessica opened the door, her face still carrying the weight of their past, but there was a softness in her eyes. Lucas, she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. The twins were playing on the floor, their backs to him. They looked so young, so innocent, and for the first time, Lucas felt a surge of emotion that he couldn't explain. As he knelt down to meet them, the boy turned around, his big brown eyes locking onto Lucas's. "Are you my dad?" the boy asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. He could barely speak, but he nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your dad." The little girl, who had been watching quietly, stood up and walked over to him. She reached out her hand, and without thinking, Lucas took it. "We have the same eyes," she said softly, her smile shy but genuine. Lucas smiled back, his heart swelling with love for these children he had just met but already felt so connected to. It was overwhelming. He realized, in that moment, that this was the family he had been missing all these years. He had been so focused on building his empire, on achieving success, that he had neglected the most important thing, his family. He stood up, looking at Jessica. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I've missed so much. But I want to be here for them. I want to be their father now. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Jessica looked at him, her expression softening. "It won't be easy, Lucas," she said. "You've missed a lot, and there's a lot of trust to rebuild, but I believe you. If you're serious about this, if you're really ready to be a part of their lives, I'll help you." Lucas nodded, a weight lifting off his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, and he knew. It would take time, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. That evening, as he left Jessica's apartment, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had a long road ahead, but he was ready to take that first step. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would no longer run from the past. He would be there for his children, and he would do whatever it took to rebuild the life he had lost. As he drove home, he thought about Laura. He hadn't forgotten her. He still loved her, but he knew that he had to make a choice. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of his past. He had to move forward, for himself, for his family, and for the chance to make things right. Lucas sat alone in his office, the weight of the past few days crushing him. He had visited the twins. He had promised them that he would be there from now on, but the doubts and guilt still lingered in his heart. He had always been the type of person who believed that everything could be solved with hard work, with success. But now, as he stared at the empty chair across from him, he realized how wrong he had been. He had spent so many years building his empire, so many years climbing the corporate ladder, but at what cost? He had lost the years with his children, with his ex-wife, and now his fiancée was slipping away too. The reality of the situation hit him hard. Laura, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, had been through so much already. She had been supportive, understanding, and yet, Lucas had hidden this massive part of his life from her. How could she ever trust him again? How could he make it right? As the hours passed, Lucas paced back and forth in his office, his mind racing. He needed to make a choice. He couldn't keep living in the shadows of his past. He had to face the truth, all of it. But where did he begin? The twins were a part of his life now, and he couldn't ignore them. He couldn't just pretend like they didn't exist. He had missed out on their childhood, but maybe, just maybe, he could be there for them from this point on. But what about Laura? Could he rebuild their relationship? Could he fix the trust that had been broken? His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Jessica. He hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. The message was simple. "The twins are asking when they'll see you again. They're waiting, Lucas." His heart sank. He had promised them he would be there. He had promised himself he would change. But could he? Could he truly be the father they needed, the man Laura deserved? The weight of the decision was almost unbearable, but in that moment, Lucas knew what he had to do. He had to try. He couldn't undo the past, but he could make sure he didn't make the same mistakes again. He put his phone down and grabbed his jacket. He wasn't sure what the future would look like, but he knew he had to face it head on. He couldn't keep running away. He walked out of his office, determined to take that first step toward redemption, toward being the man he was supposed to be, not just for the twins, but for Laura and for himself. The world outside seemed unchanged, but Lucas knew that his life would never be the same again. He was going to fight for his family, no matter the cost. The following weeks felt like a blur for Lucas. His days were consumed with trying to make sense of everything. The weight of his past mistakes was unbearable, and yet, he couldn't ignore the future that was unfolding before him. The twins were a constant presence in his mind. Every moment spent with them brought him closer to understanding the magnitude of the responsibility he now carried. He had spent so much of his life building his empire, but in doing so, he had neglected the most important thing, his family. The guilt weighed heavily on him, and he knew he had to make it right, not just for himself, but for them. But there was another matter he couldn't escape. Laura. She was still in his life, still in his heart, but after everything that had happened, their relationship was fragile. He had hurt her deeply, and he wasn't sure if he could ever make up for the damage he had caused. He spent hours going over the conversation they had had after the wedding, the hurt in her eyes, the pain in her voice when she questioned his integrity. Lucas had always believed that success was the key to happiness, But now he saw how wrong he had been. Money, power, and status meant nothing without the people who truly mattered. And Laura, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was slipping away. He couldn't let that happen. He needed to make a choice, and he knew it wouldn't be easy. His first step was to apologize, to truly apologize for the pain he had caused. He reached out to Laura, asking her to meet him for dinner. He wasn't sure if she would come, but he had to try. When she arrived, the tension between them was palpable. The silence was thick as they sat across from each other, neither knowing where to begin. "I don't know how to fix this, Lucas," Laura said finally, breaking the silence. "I don't know how to trust you again." Her voice trembled, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. He had broken her trust, shattered the foundation of their relationship, and now he was left to pick up the pieces. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want to try, Laura. I want to make things right. I want to be the man you deserve." Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. She was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "I want to believe you, Lucas," she said softly. "But the truth is, I don't know if I can. You kept something so big from me, and I don't know if I can move past it." Lucas felt the weight of her words, the truth of them sinking in. He had kept secrets from her, and now, it seemed like those secrets might destroy everything they had. "I know I can't change the past," he said quietly, "but I can change the future. I want to be a better person, a better partner, and a better father. For you, for me, for the twins." Laura's eyes softened slightly, but there was still a hesitation in her gaze. "I need time, Lucas. I need time to figure out if this is something I can forgive, something we can move forward from." Lucas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He didn't expect things to magically get better overnight, but he was willing to do whatever it took to prove that he had changed. He would prove it not just to Laura, but to himself. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." As they parted ways that night, Lucas felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The road ahead would be difficult, and the journey would take time, but he was ready. Ready to face the consequences of his actions, and to build a future with the people who truly mattered. He knew the road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but he had taken the first step. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The world outside seemed unchanged, but inside, Lucas knew that everything was different. He wasn't the man he had been before. He was better. Or, at least, he was determined to be. Lucas stood in the quiet of his living room, staring out the window at the darkened city skyline. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, and though some of the tension had settled, the weight of his decisions still hung over him. He had promised Jessica he would be there for the twins, and now, every time he looked at them, he felt a deep sense of guilt and responsibility. They were innocent, but their lives had been shaped by the choices he had made long ago. He couldn't undo the past, but he was determined to make the future better for them. Lucas had already started to spend more time with the twins. He had taken them to the park, bought them ice cream, and even tried to help them with their schoolwork. Each time he saw their faces light up with excitement, he felt a glimmer of hope. They were starting to trust him, and for the first time, he felt like he was doing something right. But as much as he wanted to move forward with them, he knew there was still a huge gap to bridge between himself and Laura. She hadn't been the same since the wedding. The distance between them seemed to grow each day, and despite his efforts to make things right, he could see that trust had been shattered. Lucas knew he had to give her space, but he also knew that time wasn't on his side. Every moment spent apart felt like another missed opportunity. He missed her more than he was willing to admit. The love they shared was still there, buried under the layers of hurt and disappointment, but the path to rebuilding that trust was unclear. Lucas couldn't help but replay their last conversation in his mind. She had told him she needed time, but he didn't know how much time she needed. What if he lost her forever? What if this was the end of their relationship? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find Jessica standing there, her expression neutral but serious. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy with unspoken tension. Lucas hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course," he said, stepping aside to let her in. As they sat down, the room felt smaller, filled with the weight of their past. Jessica spoke first. "I know things have been complicated," she began, "but I want you to know that I'm not asking for anything from you. I just want you to be the father they deserve. They're finally starting to open up to you, and I don't want to see that ruined. Lucas nodded, his throat tightening as he thought about the responsibility he had taken on. I know I've missed so much. And I know I can't change that, he said quietly. But I want to be there for them. I want to be the father they deserve. Jessica looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softening. I know you do, she said. But you can't just be a father to them when it's convenient. You have to be there for the long haul. I don't want them to get hurt again. They've already been through enough. Lucas felt the weight of her words. She was right. He couldn't just be a part-time father, showing up when it suited him. He had to be there every day, no matter how difficult it was. I understand, he said quietly. And I'll be there. I'll do whatever it takes. Jessica stood up to leave, but before she walked out the door, she turned back to him. I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, she said. But there's still a lot of work to do. Just remember, it's not just about the twins. It's about your future, too. Don't let this slip away. Lucas watched her leave, the words she had said echoing in his mind. The future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear. He couldn't keep living the way he had. He had to be a father. He had to be a better man for the twins, and he had to fight for Laura. He had already lost so much, but he wasn't going to lose the chance to rebuild. As he sat there in the quiet of his living room, he made a promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to make things right, to be the man he should have been all along. The path ahead was long and difficult, but Lucas knew that as long as he was willing to face the truth and take responsibility, he could build a future with the family he had never known he had. The days following his conversation with Jessica were filled with reflection and soul-searching for Lucas. Each day, he tried to make amends in the small ways he could, but the enormity of what had happened was still weighing heavily on his heart. The twins had been in his life for only a few weeks, but already, they had started to mean more to him than anything else. He found himself thinking about them constantly, hoping they were adjusting to their new reality, hoping they felt loved, and most importantly, hoping they didn't feel abandoned again. Lucas had always been a man of action, someone who believed in taking control of his life and circumstances. But this was different. This was about more than just business deals or expanding his empire. This was about relationships, trust, and time, things he had never fully appreciated until now. As the days passed, he tried his best to balance the demands of his business and his new role as a father. But he knew that the time he spent with the twins was crucial. They needed him now, not just as a provider, but as a presence in their lives. He began spending his free time with them, taking them to the park, playing games, and reading stories at night. Little by little, the bond between them grew stronger, and Lucas could feel it. They were still hesitant at times, unsure of who he really was, but he was patient. He understood that trust was earned, and he was willing to put in the work. However, there was still the matter of Laura. They hadn't spoken much since that night, when everything had come to light. She had kept her distance, unsure of what to make of Lucas' sudden commitment to change. He knew she was confused, hurt, and angry, and he didn't blame her. But he also knew that if he wanted a future with her, he needed to prove that he had changed. Lucas called her one evening and asked if they could meet. He had a lot to say, and he needed to apologize, to truly apologize for everything. He was nervous as he waited at the restaurant, wondering if she would even show up. When she walked in, his heart skipped a beat. She looked just as beautiful as ever, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of sadness and uncertainty. Laura, Lucas said softly as she sat across from him. I've hurt you. I know I have. And I'm sorry. I can't change the past, but I can try to make the future better. For you. For me. For us. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Lucas, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to. You kept secrets from me, big ones. You lied, and it broke my heart. Lucas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I understand, he said quietly. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm asking for a chance, Laura. A chance to prove that I'm serious. A chance to show you that I can be the man you deserve. There was a pause as Laura seemed to consider his words. I want to believe you, Lucas, she said at last. But it's going to take time. You've broken my trust, and I don't know if I can rebuild it. I don't know if we can go back to what we had. Lucas felt his heart sink, but he didn't let it show. I know it won't be easy, he replied. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I will do whatever it takes to show you that I'm committed to this, to us. I'm not the man I was before, and I will prove it. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes softening. I don't know where we'll end up, Lucas, she said, but I'm willing to try. For the twins. For you. For us. Lucas felt a small spark of hope as they left the restaurant together. It wasn't a grand resolution, and it wasn't a promise of a perfect future, but it was a step in the right direction. He had a long road ahead of him, with the twins to care for and the fragile relationship with Laura to rebuild. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. The past wasn't something he could undo, but the future? That was still in his hands. And he was determined to make the most of it. He was ready to fight for his family, ready to be the man he should have been all along. Lucas had barely slept in the days following his dinner with Laura. He had done everything he could think of to prove to her that he was committed to change, but it wasn't enough. Every time he saw her, it seemed like there was a wall between them, one he couldn't break down. His thoughts kept drifting back to the twins, their faces filled with hope as they looked up at him. He had promised them that he would be there, but how could he be the father they needed when his own future was so uncertain? His mind was constantly racing, but no matter how much he tried to focus on his business, his relationships, his life, it always came back to the same thing. He had failed. The reality of being a father, a real father, was settling in. There were so many things he had to learn, so many moments he would never get back, and he knew that he couldn't undo the past. But that didn't mean he couldn't fight for the future. It was late one evening when Lucas decided to take a drive, clear his head. He needed to get away from the office, away from the constant pressure of the world he had built. The city lights blurred as he drove through the streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He couldn't stop thinking about Laura, about how much he had hurt her, how much she had given him. He had promised her forever, and yet, he had betrayed that promise in ways he never realized. He couldn't keep running from his past, and he couldn't keep making excuses for his mistakes. Lucas needed to prove to Laura that he was worth trusting again. He needed to show her that the man sitting in front of her now was different, that he had learned, that he had grown. He had to be honest, not just with her, but with himself. That night, after a long drive, he found himself standing in front of Laura's apartment building. His heart raced as he stared up at the window. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he was ready. He needed to make things right. He couldn't waste any more time. As he entered the building and walked up to her door, Lucas took a deep breath. When she opened the door, the tension between them was thick, but there was something different in her eyes. I don't know if I'm ready, Lucas, Laura said softly as she stepped aside to let him in. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was no anger in it, only sadness. Lucas swallowed hard. I know I've hurt you. I know I can't take back everything I've done, but I want to try. I want to build a future with you, Laura. I'm not the man I was when we first met. I've learned. I've changed. Laura didn't say anything at first, and Lucas could feel his heart racing. The silence between them seemed to stretch on forever. He waited, unsure of what to say next. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I want to believe you, Lucas. I do. But I need to see it. I need to know that you're not just saying these things because it's what I want to hear. I need to see the actions, not just the words. Lucas nodded, understanding. He had always been good at making promises, but he had never truly kept them. Now, he had to show her that he was different, that he was ready to take responsibility, not just for his past, but for their future. I'm ready, he said. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you, Laura. I can't. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the conversation settling around them. Laura's gaze softened, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. I don't know what the future holds, Lucas, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take the chance. But you need to prove to me that this isn't just a phase. Lucas didn't hesitate. I will prove it to you, he said. I will show you that I can be the man you deserve. I will be the father the twins deserve. I will be the man who doesn't run from his responsibilities. I promise you, Laura, I will be here. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt a flicker of hope. It wouldn't be easy, and he didn't expect everything to be perfect overnight. But as he stood there with Laura, he knew that he was finally on the path to something real. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready to face them, one step at a time. He had made his decision, and now it was time to live up to it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Lucas felt ready to take control of his destiny. Lucas stood in the quiet of his apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just transpired. He had promised Laura he would prove himself, but that was easier said than done. The weight of his past mistakes still lingered heavily on him, and though he had taken steps to make things right, he couldn't shake the nagging fear that it wasn't enough. The twins were still adjusting to having him in their lives, and he was doing everything he could to be the father they deserved, but the journey was far from easy. Every day, he found himself facing challenges, his work, his past, and his relationships, all demanding his attention. But through it all, he was determined to stay focused. He had to rebuild what he had lost, and that meant putting in the effort to prove his commitment not just to Laura, but to the family he had neglected for so long. The following day, Lucas took the twins to the park, as he had done many times since they first arrived in his life. But this time, there was a sense of purpose in his actions. He wasn't just trying to make up for lost time. He was trying to build something real, something lasting. He watched them play, their laughter echoing in his ears, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of fulfillment. He was a father, and that meant more to him than anything else. But as the days passed, Lucas realized that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were still moments of doubt, still moments when the weight of his choices threatened to pull him under. But he was determined to fight for his family, for the future he wanted to build with them. He knew that it wasn't just about being there for the twins. It was about being there for Laura too. The emotional distance between them hadn't disappeared, but he was starting to feel like there was hope. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Lucas decided to call Laura. He knew that they needed to talk, and he couldn't keep avoiding it. When she answered the phone, her voice was quiet, but there was a softness to it that he hadn't heard in a while. "Hey," she said, her tone cautious but not cold. "Hi, Laura. I was thinking about us, and I know it's been a rough road. I just want you to know that I'm still here. I'm committed to us. I'm ready to do the work, whatever it takes." There was silence on the other end of the line, and Lucas held his breath, waiting for her response. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now. "I'm glad to hear that, Lucas. But I need to see it. I need to see that you're serious about this. We can't go back to the way things were, but maybe we can start fresh." Lucas felt a surge of relief. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a step in the right direction. He was willing to fight for her, for them. "I can prove it to you, Laura," he said, his voice steady with determination. "I can show you that I'm ready. That I'm ready to be the man you need. The man I've always wanted to be." There was another pause, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. "I want to believe you," she said finally, her voice tinged with hope. "I really do. But it's going to take time. I need to see that you're committed to the long haul, not just in words, but in action." Lucas nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I understand," he said, "and I'll prove it. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to work for it. For you. For us." The conversation ended with a sense of cautious optimism. Lucas didn't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but he was willing to take things one step at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. As he sat there in the quiet of his apartment, looking out at the city, Lucas realized that his life had changed forever. The man he was before, driven by success, blinded by ambition, was gone. And in his place was someone who was finally ready to face the truth, to take responsibility, and to fight for the family he had once ignored. It wasn't going to be easy, but Lucas knew that he was ready to try. Ready to prove that he could be the man Laura and the twins needed him to be. Lucas woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing, the sunlight streaming through the blinds of his bedroom. He had promised himself that today would be different. It had been weeks since his conversation with Laura, and although things were far from perfect, there had been small signs of progress. He had spent the past few days continuing his routine with the twins, taking them to the park, reading stories at night, and slowly but surely, they were starting to open up to him. The bond was growing, but Lucas knew that it was still fragile. As he stepped into the shower, he tried to push aside the nagging feeling in his chest. There was a lot left to fix, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't the man he had been before. He was different now. He was learning to be present, to prioritize the people who mattered most. He had a family to build, and no matter how daunting the task seemed, he was ready to face it head on. After his shower, Lucas got dressed and prepared for the day ahead. He had a meeting scheduled with his team, but his mind kept drifting back to Laura. He knew she was still uncertain, still wrestling with her feelings, but he couldn't help but feel hopeful. He had taken the first steps to rebuild their relationship, and even though it would take time, he was committed. His phone buzzed again as he sat at the kitchen table, a text from Jessica. The twins are asking when they'll see you next. They're excited to spend more time with you. Lucas smiled at the message. It felt good to know that he was making a difference in their lives, even if it was in small ways. He replied, "I'll be over later today. I'm looking forward to it." As he finished his breakfast, his mind drifted back to Laura. He had been patient with her, but he knew he couldn't wait forever. He had to prove to her that he was serious about changing, that he was ready to be the man she deserved. He had to show her that he was no longer the man who kept secrets, who neglected the people he loved. He was ready to be someone better. After his meeting, Lucas made his way to the twins' house. He had arranged to spend the afternoon with them, taking them to the zoo, a small step, but an important one. When he arrived, the twins greeted him with smiles, and he felt his heart swell with love for them. As they drove to the zoo, Lucas felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just going through the motions. He was building something real. The day at the zoo was filled with laughter, excitement, and moments of connection. Lucas was starting to see the joy in the simple things, something he had overlooked for so long. As the day came to a close, Lucas took the twins back to their home, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. But as he stood at the door, ready to say goodbye, he knew that he couldn't stop here. He still had work to do, still had to prove that he could be there for them, day in and day out. As he left the house, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Laura. "Can we talk tonight?" it read. Lucas felt his heart race. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He didn't know what she was going to say, but he was ready. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to take the next step in rebuilding their relationship. That night, when they met at a quiet cafe, the tension between them was palpable. But Lucas wasn't afraid anymore. He had nothing left to hide. "I'm ready to prove myself to you, Laura," he said, his voice steady. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not the same person I was. I want to make things right, for us." Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "It's going to take time, Lucas," she said softly. "But I'm willing to try. I need to see the actions, not just the words." Lucas nodded, understanding. "I will show you, Laura. I'll show you that I'm serious. I'll prove it with every day, every moment. I'm not going anywhere." As they sat there, the quiet of the cafe surrounding them, Lucas realized that the journey ahead was far from over. There would be challenges, there would be doubts, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a chance. He had made mistakes, but he wasn't going to let them define him. He was ready to fight for his family. The road to redemption was long, but it was a road he was willing to walk, one step at a time.